Welcome back. This is the French Revolution. All right, this is essential question 10.4. When we left off on our last notes, Louis XVI and his family just made maybe a colossal blunder on their part. All right, if you remember, in June 1791, Louis XVI and his family tried to escape France and make it to Austria in hopes of maybe bringing a revolution or bringing armies of the Austrian armies back to France in order to stop the revolution. And I told you, now all of France doesn't trust him. He's going to go from being viewed as a fatherly protector to basically a traitor to his own people. So, essential question 10.4 is, what factors caused the French Revolution to enter a more radical phase? Now, by radical phase, I mean something that is completely different than what has been going on. Radical means drastic or way different, all right? So, what factors caused the French Revolution to become more radical? All right? So, pause if you need to. We're going to jump right into this 10.4. Maybe, if I can get my clicker to work. Maybe. Come on. All right. Okay, maybe. All right, here we go. All right, so the Declaration of Pillnitz. All right, so Louis XVI has been caught. Him and his family were dragged back into France, and they were put back in the palace of the Tuileries. And basically, Austria is not happy about that. So, Emperor Leopold II of Austria, that is Marie Antoinette's brother. Remember, Marie Antoinette is an Austrian princess. So, here's what happens. King Frederick William II is Prussia, and they are the allies of Austria, although Prussia is reluctant to get into this debacle, as you will see. But anyway, as you can imagine, Marie Antoinette's brother is a little worried for her safety as well as the safety of her husband and the rest of the family because, like I said, it looked pretty bad, Louis trying to leave the country. So, what happened was Emperor Leopold II basically gets Frederick William II to agree, like I said, reluctantly, to basically back him up. And what they do is they issue this thing called the Declaration of Pillnitz. Guys, and Pillnitz is a place, where is it? Is it in Austria? I think it might be in Austria. I gotta look that up. Anyway, the declaration is that they threaten France, the new government, the National Assembly, which, by the way, calls itself the Legislative Assembly now. It doesn't really matter. But anyway, that's what they call themselves. So they tell the National Assembly, hey, look, if you hurt Marie or you hurt Louis or anybody in their family, we, Prussia and Austria, will invade France and beat you down. Now, here's the deal. Think about the French government now. They have been issued a direct threat from a foreign military. All right? They're enemies. Austrians have always been enemies of France. And now, guys, think about this. All of the rumors floating around about Marie Antoinette, she's Austrian, she's not French, now they all look true because they're threatening now to bring back in an army. And now it really looks bad for Louis XVI because now they're going to invade. But I'll be honest with you, Louis XVI wants there to be a war because Louis XVI feels like if Austria and Prussia invade, they'll beat down the French Revolution and put him back in power. All right? So anyway, guys, now the government of France is facing a crisis. Worse than debt, it's debt and being invaded by a foreign army. Pause if you need to. All right, a second revolution. So the first revolution was the fall of the Bastille and the creation of the National Assembly. That was the first revolution, guys. But there's about to be a second revolution. And guys, the French Revolution, it's like many revolutions wrapped up into one. So this is the second one, all right? So before we talk about this next one, let's talk about the Jacobins, all right? Jacobins, you see, here's the deal. One of the things that happened in Great Britain and even in America, in the United States, in France, was that different Enlightenment-minded people, remember we talked about how people would meet at coffee houses and taverns, right, to have intellectual discussions, obviously salons too. But what happened is usually wealthier people, educated people would form what are called political clubs. Now, what do you do at a political club? Well, you get together, You might have a few drinks and you talk about politics, but you call your club a name. The Jacobins named themselves after Jacques, some guy named Jacques, I don't remember. But anyway, you don't need to know. But they named themselves, guys, the Jacobins, and they are a political club. But here's the deal. The Jacobins are not just Enlightenment-minded leaders of the National Assembly. They are more radical Enlightenment-minded leaders of the National Assembly. As a matter of fact, when the National Assembly argued to create the Constitution of 1791, which created a constitutional monarchy, the Jacobins would have been like, do we really want a constitutional monarchy? And what they wanted, guys, was a full-blown republic, which is what the United States have. They wanted a legislative branch. They wanted it elected. They wanted a president that's elected. They wanted to have a republic like the United States. No king at all. All right? So when I say that these are Enlightenment-minded people, they are radical. And by radical, I mean no constitutional monarchy, which was not really that radical. They wanted a full-blown republic, just like the United States. So here's the deal. By 1791, when all this stuff is going down with Louis XVI, guess who dominates the new National Assembly government? It's the Jacobins. So you go from having level-headed, reform-minded people to basically these Jacobins that want a republic, more radical people. So that's one of the reasons that things become radical is the Jacobins start to become a bigger and bigger force in the new government. All right? So the Jacobins convince the Legislative Assembly to declare war on Austria and Prussia. Now think about this. Austria and Prussia didn't declare war, they threatened. But the National Assembly responds by declaring war on Austria and Prussia. Now, this is going to end up being kind of a big mistake in a way, but also it depends on like who you are, but it kind of looks bad because think about it. Think about the peasants again, all right? So the peasants are like, at the very beginning of the French Revolution, we don't have any bread, all right? And then the Third Estate and the Tennis Court Oath and the National Assembly like, yay, everybody's equal. Everybody has the same rights, blah, 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 blah. And the peasants like, yay, you made a new government. And then, days go by, months go by, and they still don't have any bread. And they're like, okay, we're still hungry. And now, guys, what does the new government go do? The same damn thing that the old government did is to declare war and wage wars and drive the government further into debt. So once again, the lower classes are just like, oh, you gotta be kidding me. So anyway, so they declare war on Austria and Prussia. Now, why do they do it? They think it's a good thing, guys, because they think France is very divided. And one thing that unites people is a common enemy. So if they declare war on Austria and Prussia and they actually go to war, then all of the French people will unite to fight. Now, like I said, Louis XVI is like, yes, please go to war, because he thinks Austria and Prussia will win it and put him back in power. So, anyway, now, overthrowing the National Assembly, or like I said, they call themselves the Legislative Assembly now. They changed their name and they elected a whole bunch of new people. But anyway, and Jacobins were the ones that got elected. But anyway, so here's the deal. France still has problems. There's poverty, starvation, and now a new war. And like I said, the people at the bottom are still starving, and they're still in poverty. So it wasn't like the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen was like some magical document that made everybody equal and stopped poverty. All right? The French peasants are still very much like, hey, we'd like some food, please. All right? So, August 1792, so June 1791 was when Louis XVI left. All right, guys, it's been about a year, all right, of, going back and forth of elections, electing the new Jacobins. Louis and his family are still at the Tuileries, the palace. And what happens is in 1792, a crowd storms the royal palace. And there's a big fight between this crowd of people and the royal guards protecting Louis and his family. A lot of people die. A lot of royal guards die. A lot of the crowd dies, but in the end, Louis orders the guards to stop fighting, and they do. And basically, guys, the crowd arrests Marie and Louis. So, guys, now they are officially under arrest. Up until this point, they were being carefully watched, but now they are under the custody of the government, all right? As dangerous people. So, now, same year, next month, the Sans-Culottes. Now, let me tell you who the Sans-Culottes are. Sans-Culottes, the name itself means without breeches, all right? So you think, what's breeches? Aren't those pants? Like, isn't that like a 1950s word for pants? Like, hey, son, you pull up your breeches. I don't know. I just made up some kind of old man name and breeches. All right. I definitely heard that growing up, that term. Breeches. It means your pants. But guys, breeches or breeches were actually a special kind of pants worn by wealthy people. All right. So like nobles and bourgeoisie, they would have wore these things called breeches, which are called culottes. All right. So culottes, guys, are like pants that come up to about your calf. We would call them capris today, and they were worn by members of the wealthy groups, right? Well, these people called themselves sans culottes. The word sans is Latin for, or French, without. So these people call themselves without culottes. Like, we are not the wealthy people. We are the poor. We don't wear those kinds of pants. We don't wear those fancy pants. So the sans-culottes are a group of working class people. They call themselves a sans-culotte, and they're sick of all these problems, and they feel like the new government is just like the old government, except instead of nobles, now the bourgeoisie are trying to be the nobles, and they're still not really fixing the problems of France. So the sans-culottes, these working class people, storm the National Assembly, and they demand a new government, all right? New elections, all right, that will actually fix the problems of France. So they demand what's called a convention, all right, to fix all the problems, okay? Now, what do they want specifically? Well, one of the biggest problems is the price of bread. So what they want the government to do is the opposite of what Adam Smith said, laissez-faire. They want the government to set what are called price controls, all right? Now, one of the things that causes bread to rise is supply and demand, right? So think about it. If there's not a lot of supply of bread, that means it's rare. What does that do to the price of that bread? It drives it up, right? So what they want is the government to physically set the price and say, no matter what happens, the price of bread can never go higher than this certain amount. And that will make bread affordable to the people, all right? And it'll show that the government is trying to keep bread prices down. Now, another thing is they don't like the bourgeoisie and they don't like the nobles. Like I say, they distrust both of them. They call themselves sans-culottes. We don't have the fancy, wealthy pants that people wear, all right? So that's what they want, all right? Now, they're led by this fiery guy named George Danton, who is one of these radical Jacobins. And under George Danton, there's a lot of these massacres. They're called the August massacres and the September massacres. And basically, members of the nobility and wealthier classes are like murdered and massacred in these outbursts of violence. And George Danton is like the leader of those. And like I said, they believed that those enemies of France need to be killed. If you are an enemy of the revolution, if you are an enemy of change, then you are part of the problem and you need to go. So guys, the French Revolution is getting more and more and more radical, all right? No more are they wanting to work with the king. They want to get rid of the king and have a republic and now fix price controls on bread, kill anybody that's an enemy of France. It is getting out of control. Pause if you need to. All right, so they call the National Convention in 1792. They actually call it the National Convention because they name it after the American Constitutional Convention, which actually writes the American Constitution. All right? So, here's the deal. Radicals want a new constitution, the Jacobins, and they want to get rid of the monarchy. All right? They want to get rid of the king altogether. Let's have a republic. And the Jacobins were actually split into two different groups. One of them were called the Girondins. And the Girondins called themselves the Girondins because they're from one of the departments in France that's named, Girondin? I don't know. It's either Gironde or Girondin. I don't know. But it's the name of the place that they're from. They are more level-headed Jacobins, all right? So these guys are not the radical radicals, all right? They're Jacobins, which means they're, fairly radical, but they're not so crazy. Now, the Mountain is the radical Jacobins. Now, you might be like, why do they call themselves the Mountain? They call themselves the Mountain because they all sit at the top of the seats at the convention, at the very top of the National Assembly with the highest seats, like they're on top of a mountain. So these are the more radical Jacobins. Now, here's the deal. The Mountain wants some radical ideas. One of the very first things that they have to discuss is, what do we do with King Louis XVI? Now, the Mountain says, execute him. Kill him. If we get rid of the king, then there's no going back to the revolution because he's dead. Now, the Girondins are like, look, if you kill Louis XVI, not only will Austria and Prussia come after us, but every monarchy in Europe will come after us, and we're fighting a world war. And by world war, I mean like a European war rather than just Austria and Prussia. So the Girondins say, don't do it. Everybody's going to come after us. The Mountain says, let's do it, because after that, there's no going back. And guess what? January 1793, Louis XVI is voted to be executed by guillotine. Now, we'll talk about a little bit about the guillotine tomorrow, but the guillotine is a new invention. All right, let me see. It's a new invention with a blade that's weighted, and what it does is it drops very fast and it cuts the head off really quickly and very cleanly. Now, a lot of people in the French Revolution, Enlightenment-minded people, thought that this was a really humane way to kill somebody. All right, they chop their head off. They say there's no pain. It happens so fast that it is humane, rather than chopping somebody's head off with a sword. Sometimes it takes 2 or 3 shots to get the head off, and that's cruel and unusual punishment. So, this guy named Dr. Guillotin is the guy that named the guillotine, and he comes up with this humane execution device, and it's used many times. And then it's time to put Louis XVI on the guillotine. So they walk Louis XVI up to the guillotine. I got to tell you the story because it's fascinating. They walk him up, guys, and what they do is they tie you to this little stretcher so that you can't move, and they lay you down. They put your head in this little wooden thing I'll show you tomorrow, and they drop the blade, and your head comes off. Now, I don't know if you guys, especially if you're in the medical academy, you probably know this, but in your head there's a lot of blood. So when a head gets chopped off fast, blood can sometimes literally just shoot out of the neck, just gush. And when Louis XVI's head came off, blood shot out of his neck, and it is said by a lot of people that were there that the peasants actually ran forward to try to get their handkerchiefs and any part of their clothes to dip in the blood of Louis XVI. Now you might say, ooh, gross, why are they doing that? Well, a lot of the peasants are superstitious. They still, in some ways, kind of believe in divine right, like God's chosen, and that the blood of Louis XVI is kind of special. So, they chop off Louis XVI's head. Now, before they do it, Louis XVI tries to give some kind of speech where he declares that he's innocent, and he hopes that, no more blood will be spilled in France, and, all this stuff, and they start playing the drums, and they, like I said, they cut his head off, and the peasants run forward, so there it is. He's dead, all right? It's shocking. There's silence at first in the crowd, and then, somebody shouts, death to the king, long live the republic, yada, 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 and there's a big, whatever, okay? So, Louis XVI is executed. October, the same year, Marie Antoinette goes to the guillotine herself. It's kind of interesting about her. When she goes to the guillotine, she's like walking up the steps. She's very quiet. She actually steps on one of the soldiers' foots that's on the guillotine, gallows up there. And, she apologizes, like, oh, I'm so sorry that I did that. I'm sorry. She's very, quiet and very, people say that she was very noble and, not scared. She was very brave. Anyway, she gets her head cut off too. All right, so now she's dead. Now, what about their kids? Their only living son dies in prison of sickness and neglect. They do have a daughter that survives for a decently long time. But anyway, now Louis XVI is dead and Marie Antoinette is dead, and it's shocking. And you're right, all of Europe is going to declare war on these guys. Pause if you need to. All right, so like I said, that went pretty fast, right? Radical. And now they're chopping off the king and queen's head. So Europe is at war with France now. Like I said, it wasn't just Austria and Prussia. Great Britain's going to jump in. Spain's going to jump in. Everybody's going to jump in on this war. Russia. All right? So now there's some kind of disagreements throughout Europe as to what to do. Some people think the war is just. Some people think the war is not just. One of the people that thinks the war is unjust, we'll talk about this guy a lot in the next, in 2 chapters from now. His name's Edmund Burke. He's a British politician, and he writes what's called Reflections on the Revolution of France. And in this work, he is going to rip the Revolution of France. He's going to basically say, it's radical, it's a bunch of crazy people, all right? They are unrealistic. France has a society, and you can't change society overnight. You can't get rid of nobles and the 3 estates overnight, and by murdering people to do that, that's uncool. You guys know what I'm saying. They're saying this is a crazy revolution. It's not as noble as, say, the American Revolution, which was, had some noble goals, and the American Revolution wasn't cutting people's heads off, all right? It's about to really get nasty here in a little bit. But anyway, they argued that it was far too radical. All right, Edmund Burke did. Now, other people are going to fire back and say, oh, it's noble, it's whatever, it's yada, yada, yada. But you get a lot of Europeans that don't agree with this revolution. As a matter of fact, it makes them downright afraid. Think about it. France is right, not in the heart of Europe, it's on the western coast of Europe, but it's connected to a big chunk of Europe. And if the revolution were to, say, spread to Spain, pretty soon Spanish peasants are going to want to overthrow their nobles. If it spreads to Great Britain, pretty soon the working class people of Great Britain might want the king of Great Britain's head to get cut off. You guys see the idea. If this revolution spreads, it spells trouble for all of Europe. So there's a lot of fear. As a matter of fact, there's so much fear that our most free country so far, besides the United States, Great Britain, you guys will realize next year in the U.S. it's not really that free, but anyway, Great Britain, the pinnacle, the ideal state that does all these, Enlightenment ideas, they're going to start cracking down, all right? So Europe and the United States, they don't want anything to do with the French Revolution. As a matter of fact, France asks George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, 3 U.S. presidents, hey, will you please help us fight all these wars because we helped you, and we basically tell France, yeah, we're not going to get involved in that. And we really piss France off. You'll see that once again next year in AP US history when you learn about this thing called the XYZ affair. But anyway, bottom line is we really piss off France. Okay? So we don't want anything to do with it because we don't agree because they just cut off their king's head. And you're going to see tomorrow it's going to get really bad. So, but the British Prime Minister, his name was William Pitt the Younger. His father was William Pitt, so he's the son. He started to crack down on free speech. He would arrest people that spoke out against the government. That doesn't sound very free like Great Britain normally does. And he exiled radical thinkers. If people, were like, calling for a drastic change, he would just kick them out of Great Britain. And so far, like I said, guys, this does not sound like the Great Britain that we've been learning about, the freedom of speech, the constitutional monarchy. But the fear, guys, the fear of the French Revolution spreading to them causes Great Britain to even crack down on free speech. All right, so everywhere now is getting afraid. Not so much the United States, we're afraid of other things. But yeah, they're all getting afraid. Pause if you need to. Oh yeah, there's William Pitt the Younger. Looks old with a white wig, but anyway. Okay, all right, so the second and third partitions of Poland. Do you guys remember Poland in a couple chapters ago? And do you guys remember how they never had a strong monarchy? So like Prussia and Russia and Austria kind of divided them up. Well, guys, Poland is about ready to go bye-bye for good. All right, well, up until World War I. So, guys, here are the different partitions of Poland. If you look, 1772 was the first one we talked about. This one's going to happen in 1793, early on in the French Revolution during this thing called the Reign of Terror. And then 1795, a third partition. All right, now remember, partition means it's getting taken over by other people. All right, so Poland, when the French Revolution happens, they get some reform ideas. They're like, hey, what if we reformed our government, but not to add more liberal, at least some of them. Some of them want to strengthen the monarchy because a strong Poland would mean a strong ally against France. So anyway, but here's the other deal. There was a reform radical group in Poland that wanted to adopt more Enlightenment ideas like legal equality, which means everybody is equal before the law. Well, here's where the nobles of Poland maybe go a little wrong here. They actually ask Catherine the Great, remember the enlightened absolutists of Russia, Catherine the Great, to help defeat the reformers in Poland in 1792. So it's like the nobles actually gang up with Russia to say, hey, let's beat these reformers so they don't change us like France. But what ends up happening is, when Catherine comes in there and brings in her armies, she first talks to Frederick William of Prussia and says, look, why don't we just take over Poland? They've got some radical ideas, and if we just take them over and partition their land away, we get land and we don't have to worry about it. So Frederick William and Catherine just decide to further partition Poland. So you can see Prussia and Russia in the second partition of Poland, and then Austria jumps in on the third. And then, guys, by 1795, basically, Poland doesn't exist as an independent nation until after World War I in 1919. Okay. All right. Pause if you need to. We're almost done here. All right. So now, guys, France is at war with Russia and Prussia and Great Britain and everybody, and they're terrified. Not only that, but there are rebellions in different parts of France where the supporters of the king want to bring a monarchy back and put Louis XVI's brother, all right, the Count d'Artois, which we talked about, in a while back, put his brother in power. So now, guys, the French Revolution is literally afraid of losing the revolution to armies outside of France and to enemies inside of France. So, France is at war with Europe and literally itself. Like I said, they're facing rebellions now that are trying to stop the revolution and put a king back in power. So what they do is they're going to create one of the worst named things in history. They're going to call it the Committee of Public Safety. Now, you'll find out tomorrow why this is probably the worst name for this thing. But the Committee of Public Safety was a committee of 12 people, and they were basically given unlimited power in order to fix the problems of France and defend France from all enemies. Now, let me tell you the problem with defending France from all enemies. Who gets to decide who an enemy is? If you said the government, then you're right. So that's a very dangerous thing, because if the government thinks you're an enemy, they're going to come after you. So look at what happens. They're going to go from legislative assembly to national convention. Now they're going to give absolute power to 12 people and say, hey, defend us. All right? Now, the leader of this committee is a man whose name is infamous with the worst part of the French Revolution. His name is Maximilien Robespierre. So remember the name Robespierre, because this is the guy that's going to be responsible for basically becoming a dictator in France. All right? So he's a Jacobin. He's radical-minded. He believes in the Enlightenment. You'll see very much believes in the Enlightenment. But yeah, so when the Committee of Public Safety comes around, this is when France is finally just going to give it up and kind of devolve into blood. All right? Now, one more thing that happens is, in order to deal with all the threats outside of France, the Committee of Public Safety issues what's called the Levy en Masse. All right? So the levy en masse is conscription. Now, conscription should you be yellow. Guys, conscription is a fancy word for saying a draft. Basically, every able-bodied person, men and women actually served in the military, are going to join the military of France in order to fight their enemies. They actually raise an army of 1 million troops, making it, by this time, the largest army that Europe has ever seen, and it's an army of the common people. It's something that's never been done before. An army of everybody, of commoners, even women. And with such a large force, they're actually going to be able to stop the invasions of Prussia and Austria and halt their invasions and kind of like... But I will tell you right now, this war that's going on between France and all of Europe is going to last up until about 1814. So guys, this war is going to last about 14 years, 12 years. Long time. 11 years. I'm terrible at math. All right? It's going to last a long time. Okay? So they draft over 1 million people, and they also establish price controls on bread in order to satisfy the sans-culotte, the working class. All right? So what is going to happen now, guys? I'm going to leave you off with this. They've just created an army to fight off the enemies outside of France, and tomorrow we're going to talk about how they deal with quote-unquote enemies inside of France. I'll see you tomorrow, guys.